Okay, hello Zenova Network. Welcome to our next webinar. So my name is Shivani Ludwig, and today we're talking about one of our latest RFIs, focusing on flavoring plant protein-based jerky. As always, the audience is muted during the webinar to reduce background noise. So if you have any questions to ask, please, we encourage you to ask them using the chat window, which I'll explain at the end where you can find that. But it's a chat window of your Skype application on your phone or desktop. So before we get into the webinar, I want to highlight a couple of upcoming webinars. On May 22nd, we'll cover another of our newer RFIs on point-of-use water purification. That's going to be followed by a more general webinar on June 5th on understanding trade secrets. So this webinar highlights the fact that Zenova is not focusing solely on patents, but can also protect solutions using trade secret. And we'll explain what that means and how it's different from a patent. So moving into our presentation, you notice we've had another RFI on plant-based protein, processing that, and this one's focused on jerky. And if you're familiar with this meat-based snack, you might ask, why would we be interested in a plant-based version? And the answers are similar to why we're interested in plant-based proteins at all, which is that it's essentially more environmentally sustainable. A carbon footprint of generating meat-based snacks is very high, and so this is more sustainable. And there are a variety of other reasons consumers may want to avoid meat, such as religion, diet, health concerns, etc. But consumers avoiding meat may still want meat-like flavors and mouthfeel from their snacks. And so the challenge is to create a plant-based jerky with still the very pleasant flavors that your beef jerky, for example, would have. So for example, here you're looking at a soy jerky that could be fire roasted or peppered. But the challenge is that adding flavors before or during production doesn't necessarily lead to success, because the flavor molecules can be destroyed by the process. And after production, the molecules may not be able to penetrate the cooked protein. And I'll explain this in more detail. So first of all, meat-based jerky is far easier to make. Essentially, you marinate the lean meat in a curing solution mixed with brine, and this solution has a variety of things that provide taste, prolongs the shelf life, it even provides antimicrobials, and so these are seasonings, sodium phosphates that tenderize it, sodium nitrite that stabilize the color and prevent rancidity, sugars. And after marinating, you dry the cured meat, and you're left with the meat-based snack that everyone is familiar with the ideal texture. And so when thinking about what makes meat-based jerky delicious, there are several aspects. For example, its tenderness, chewiness, juiciness, palatability or taste, perceptibility of connective tissue, stringiness, and just overall attractiveness. And you'll notice with a lot of these traits, they're related very much to it being meat-based. So perceptibility of connective tissue, for example, that's closely tied into tenderness and chewiness, for example, stringiness. And so to get that kind of texture, which is essential and part of the palatability of jerky, with plant-based protein, however, you have to use a very specific process. And so that's essentially extrusion. So you would mix a plant-based protein in a barrel and heat it, and then you extrude in order to generate the fibrous structure, which forms at the dye region. So you can see, for example, here, that's actually a plant-based meat product there, plant-based protein product there. And you can see the structure there is more fibrous than it might be otherwise. After that, it's cooled and sheared, and that results in something that's more similar to jerky. Now, there are a variety of types of product that could go into making jerky. So, for example, texturized vegetable protein is used for a variety of plant-based protein snacks, but they have void moisture, less than 35%. And so it has this elastic, spongy texture that may not be very desirable, and it may even require hydration before consumption. So that's not necessarily ideal for jerky. An improved version of TVP is shredded TVP, which is mixed with a binding ingredient, and then it's formed and steamed, which results in a better mimic of meat-based jerky. An even better alternative is actually high moisture extrusion. And so using high moisture extrusion, you have up to 70% moisture, and so it more closely mimics muscle meat. And essentially you're mixing the plant protein powders with water continuously, and these are fed into extruder barrel. And because you have such high moisture levels, it's far less viscous, and that mass is then turned into the protein strands that you see in that picture on the left. During extrusion, you can use a cooling die, and with this, the drag and shear flows align the protein in the flow direction. And that's another way to generate the fiber structure that's aligned in the same direction. And all of this can be affected by, again, moisture, as you can see here, the temperature of extrusion, the residence time in the barrel, as well as other factors. And so the RFI goes into a little bit of detail explaining how the various parameters in extrusion can impact the end result, especially with regards to texture. We're focused, though, on flavor, which is tied in with with texture. And so if you think about adding flavoring before extrusion, it would be called pre-incorporation. You essentially add the flavor molecules into the feed material. And for example, you can encapsulate it. You can add flavor enhancers such as MSG. The disadvantage here is that the volatile flavor molecules can degrade due to the harsh extrusion conditions, the high heat and pressures. Pushing this process later into the middle of extrusion, you can inject the flavors into the middle or last barrel of the extruder. And you can also, for example, use emulsions to help carry the flavor, which results in some better retention rates. But again, there's disadvantages. You'll still lose flavors due to the conditions, such as expansion of the exit die. And again, the volatile molecules can be flashed off. So that leaves us with adding flavor at the end of the process, after extrusion, to the extrudate. And this can be helped by using a lipid carrier, like hydrogenated vegetable fat. The downside, of course, you're adding fat to the product, and so you're adding calories to a snack, which isn't desirable. And even still, the flavors may not penetrate the cooked protein very well. So an alternative is to combine a couple of those steps, pre-incorporation and post-coating. The result is that you do have higher quantity of flavor retained, and it allows the release of those active compounds to be slowed down, but doing that is cost intensive. So looking at some current products, there are examples of vegan or vegetarian jerky on the market. Some are based, many are based on soy actually, but some are based on mushroom, for example. And so there are interesting products that use a variety of flavors, but they may require refrigeration after opening because of the high water content. Many of them use the high moisture extrusion process. They may use yeast extract flavor enhancers, for example. The RFI also describes a variety of plant-based examples where plant-based protein is used to create mimics of other meat products. So we're focused on jerky, but it can be helpful to look at how plant-based protein has been adapted in order to become more meat-like in texture or even flavor. And so looking at those patents can be helpful to understand some of those processes. So that takes us to the scope of this RFI, and the focus really is on being able to incorporate flavor. It does describe in detail incorporating natural beef flavor, which can be vegan or non-vegan, and in fact the appendix of this RFI, Appendix A, goes into the chemistry of beef and describes very well the various molecules that form that flavor. So all the amino acids involved, the various volatile molecules, etc. And so you get an understanding of what goes into making that kind of flavor and what each of those specific molecules contribute in terms of taste. So in this RFI, we're looking to improve flavor during or prior to extrusion, but without degradation or the volatilizing. It should be cost effective, and there's a couple parameters to consider in the extrusion process. So the barrel residence time is 1.5 minutes total. That's 30 seconds of heating and 1 minute of cooling. The max temperature in there is 150 degrees Celsius, and the moisture of the extruded product is typically 50%, roughly. On the other hand, you could enhance flavor penetration after extrusion, so in the extrudate. And this could be a chemical or physical process, but it has to be scalable. So some current solutions are very similar to what you might use in your own kitchen. So you might take the cooked protein and marinate it or sous vide because, which tends to work very well, but it takes a long time. 24 to 48 hours of marinating is not scalable. And so while that's effective, we're looking for solutions that are more realistic in this case. And so there's another parameter provided here. So you have to enable penetration for a thickness of more than 0.5 centimeter at 0.2 to 0.5 weight percent in an hour or less. And so that's provides some of the scope here. Now, this RFI is very specific in what it's looking for. So we're not looking for new flavors for proteins. So the goal isn't to develop some kind of new flavor that may penetrate better, but we're looking to be able to incorporate existing flavors like natural beef flavor or perhaps others like teriyaki, barbecue, etc. But the goal isn't on what flavor you're able to incorporate, but rather that you can incorporate a flavor. So it's more about the process, if that makes sense. We're also not looking for new extrusion technologies or even non-extrusion technologies. So the idea is to be able to incorporate flavor within the extrusion process. And that's because, again, extrusion provides the texture that you need to make good jerky, or the jerky, something that more closely mimics meat-based jerky. And so we're not really looking for a new way to create the product, but just how to add flavors within the extrusion. And finally, we're not looking for new plant proteins either. So the idea isn't to create something, to create a different kind of base protein for this, but to use soy or pea protein especially, or other established plant proteins that are mentioned in the RFI. So that gives an idea of what we're looking for. It's really about the process of being able to add flavors during extrusion. Kind of to add to this, you can eliminate bad flavors if that's helpful, rather than, we're familiar with the fact that plant-based protein can have some undesirable flavors like bitterness or astringency. And so if you can eliminate that and bring out the other flavors that we're trying to incorporate, that can be helpful as well. Okay, that takes me to the end of this presentation. As always, this is recorded, and the recording will be provided on our blog and the RFI page. And at this point, I can take questions from the audience. And in case, if you've done this before, you know where to type in the questions. But if not, on the desktop, there's a chat bubble on the bottom left corner that you can click on to view the chat window. And if you're on your phone, you should see a chat bubble on the top right.